Welcome in the Vikings. Now, I am your host, Patrick Siepman. Obviously, you guys are joining me today on this Sunday with some unfortunate news. Bisi Johnson, yesterday in the final preseason game against the Denver Broncos, he tore his ACL. And it was kind of this devastating news that just broke from Tom Pelissero. He tweeted out saying, #Vikings wide receiver Bisi Johnson is feared to have suffered a torn ACL in Saturday's preseason finale. It's the other knee from the ACL tear Johnson had in camp last year. Another brutal break for a promising young player whom Kevin O'Connell had lauded for his strong camp. And that's kind of my takeaway. You know, Kevin O'Connell, he was hyping up Bisi Johnson all of training camp, saying he's just really got a strong grasp of the offense. And Bisi Johnson, he's always been a very smart player in his short tenure in the NFL. I've always felt like he's always been a pure route runner. Obviously, he was not over-the-top athletic. He didn't have that 4.4 speed, or he didn't have that 6'3", 6'4 frame like a DK Metcalf, but he was just a solid possession receiver. And I think in the Rams, Kevin O'Connell offense, I think guys like that are extremely valuable. So I'm going to be kind of breaking down this ACL injury news and then also breaking down who I think can make the depth chart now. I think this makes it a ton more interesting on who's going to kind of get that last 5 and 6 wide receiver spots, because originally I did have BC making the roster, but now obviously with this torn ACL, things are going to change. And I think guys like Myron Mitchell, Chisena, Triston Jackson, the undrafted receiver out of Syracuse, then obviously Jalen Nailor, I think those four are going to be fighting for those last 2 spots. I'm going to be giving you guys my answers to that, who I think will be the 5th and 6th receiver on the roster at the later half of this video. But first, I want to get your guys' one-word reaction to this news. What was your immediate reaction when, whether you got the notification from Tom Pelissero saying Bisi Johnson has probably suffered a torn ACL and it is now confirmed that the ACL is torn? What was your one-word reaction? I think mine was just, I'm going to cheat on this. I guess I'll give a kind of a statement, was just, I kind of feel for the guy. You know, he tore the ACL last season, and then, rehabbing and coming back, and then you tear the other knee. I mean, it's just kind of one of those brutal situations where you're just kind of feeling for the guy and just man-to-man as a person. I think when stuff like that happens, and we all know at NFL players, the ends that they will put their body towards, and just kind of the brutal nature of the game. And then once you're finally in this new offensive head coach coming in, and now when you're about to have a potential strong year, you tear your ACL. I just really end up feeling for the guy. So let me get your one-word reaction to the news. And overall, Bisi Johnson, his short career with the Minnesota Vikings, in his rookie year, him having 31 catches and nearly 300 yards with 3 touchdowns, and that was with him getting very limited reps. His rookie year, when Adam Thielen went down, he actually stepped in and did a great job filling in for Adam Thielen. And I think Bisi, just being the possession receiver, just a safety blanket that I think he could be for Kirk Cousins, running that 4th, 5th wide receiver spot where maybe he could pick up a huge 3rd down on a critical situation. But I do feel for Bisi, obviously, in this situation. Now, let's talk about who makes the team. I think this makes it incredibly interesting. So, the Vikings, obviously, you have the big dogs, Jefferson, Thielen, KJ. I think those 3 will be the 1, 2, and 3 pretty much the whole year. I think KJ has really stepped up and being a strong wide receiver 3. I think he's one of the more underrated wide receivers in the NFL. And overall, I still think this group, the wide receiver group, is top 5, if not top 3 in the NFL. And then at the wide receiver 4 spot, I think Ihmir Smith-Marsette has really kind of took a stake out in the wide receiver 4 spot, if that makes sense, for the Minnesota Vikings, just mainly because he's looked great in this preseason. And I know the stats maybe not be as a huge of a reflection on how he's played, but I think just the eye test with how Ihmir Smith-Marsette has played, it's been fantastic. He has that breakaway speed that we have looked for, and he's had some really solid punt returns. I know he had the one muff punt last week. That's going to happen. He's going to work through that and get the kinks out of there. But Ihmir Smith-Marsette, man, he's looked dangerous, and I think he is a great wide receiver 4. So I think those 4 in general are pretty locked up. Obviously, Ihmir Smith-Marsette isn't as locked in to his wide receiver 4 position as a guy like Osborn is locked into his wide receiver 3 position. But Ihmir Smith-Marsette, I think he's got that 4 spot locked up. And then at the 5 and 6 spot, this is where it gets interesting. I think it comes down to 4 names: Myron Mitchell, Dan Chisena, Triston Jackson, and Jalen Nailor. Let's start with Myron Mitchell. Myron Mitchell, second-year guy. He has looked pretty damn good in training camp. He's a very similar receiver to Bisi Johnson, in my opinion. I think he has a very strong chance to be the 5th or 6th on this roster. But now Dan Chisena. This is where it gets interesting to me. Dan Chisena, the special teams demon that he's been, obviously he has never flashed too much on offense. But I think with Kevin O'Connell understanding the speed that Dan Chisena has. Whenever there are interviews about Jefferson or Cook, there's 2 great clips of them asking, hey, who's the fastest player on this Vikings roster? They all say Dan Chisena. And so I do think Dan Chisena has a strong chance to make this roster. I think the gunner position, and just when you want to be a successful team in the NFL, you want to win at all 3 levels of the game, all 3 phases. You want to be great on offense, great on defense, and great on special teams. And I think if you kind of have an X-factor player on your special teams roster, with Ryan Wright yesterday, the big boot he has, I think just having the ability to have a world-class sprinter in Dan Chisena sprinting down the field at that 4.3 speed he has, I think that's very interesting. I think he has a very strong chance to make this team now. Originally, I left him off. In my final 53-man projection, I didn't have Chisena making it, mainly because I didn't really believe that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in his first year and Kevin O'Connell in their first year would kind of take, I guess not a risk, but a flyer on a guy like Dan Chisena, but I definitely think he has a strong chance to make it. And now kind of maybe my favorite underrated wide receiver in the NFL is Triston Jackson. He had a bad drop yesterday against the Broncos. It was on a deep crossing route about 25 yards down the field, and Mond actually gave him a pretty solid football, and he just straight up dropped it. But overall, he's had a great camp. He's competed with some of the top corners on the Vikings roster, going back and forth with Andrew Booth Jr., and he's really looked good. He's undrafted out of Syracuse. He was with the Rams last season on their practice squad, kind of in and out of their 53-man roster. I think Triston Jackson, though, he's another guy where, yes, losing Bisi Johnson, and you feel for the guy, but we have guys that can step up and be really solid wide receiver 5s and wide receiver 6s. And now the last name out of the 4, Jalen Nailor. Jalen Nailor is one of the smoothest route runners I saw coming out of college in this year's draft. He hasn't really popped as much as I thought he would in Vikings training camp. I thought he had a chance to be Mr. Mankato for this Vikings team this year, being the 6th rounder out of Michigan State that he is. I thought he had a chance to pop. I guess we really haven't heard the reports or seen the highlights of him kind of popping that I thought he would. But I think he could also be another great addition as the wide receiver 6 that he could develop, because I think definitely a team, if the Vikings do cut Jalen Nailor, he'll be picked up pretty instantly. And I do think Dan Chisena, I could see it now, if the Vikings do cut him, he'll go to the Patriots. That's where I think Dan Chisena, if he's not with the Vikings next year, he'll be on a team like the Patriots. So overall, out of those 4 guys, Myron Mitchell, Dan Chisena, Triston Jackson, and Jalen Nailor, if I'm picking 2 right now, I think it's going to be Myron Mitchell. I think he's had a really solid camp, and he's impressed a lot of the big names in the Vikings kind of media world, and I trust a lot of those sources that said Myron Mitchell is having a great camp. And I'm going to take a flyer. I think it is going to be Dan Chisena. I think Kevin O'Connell could get creative. Yes, his special teams value is through the roof, but I don't think people are giving him enough credit to what he can do offensively with a guy like Kevin O'Connell. Obviously with Kubiak and that kind of more of a different type of just offensive scheme than what Kevin O'Connell runs. He'll run more 4 or 5 wide receiver sets even with this wide receiver group that the Vikings have. I think Dan Chisena has a very strong chance to make this roster now because of his special teams value and just because of that breakaway speed that he has. Anyways, I want you guys to get down in the comments. If you guys made it all the way to the end of the video, you guys are real ones. I really appreciate it. Getting you guys this news, breaking down the depth chart for you guys. I want you guys to go down and let me know who do you think will be wide receiver 5 and who do you think will be wide receiver 6. Thank you guys so much for watching. Skol Vikes.